This episode is brought to you by Love Honey. Relationships can be messy, chaotic, and here's something nobody really says out loud, but everyone knows. Sometimes other people are just a lot. The situationship that's been situationshipping for 6 months with no resolution. The date who was perfect on paper but insufferable in person. The person who texts back eventually, having clearly not read what you actually said. And at some point, you just decide, not tonight. Tonight, I am taking myself off the market entirely. Plans cancelled, door locked, phone face down. This evening is for me and nobody else is invited. This is actually a radical act of self-prioritization. Choosing your own good time over waiting for someone else to maybe, possibly, if you're lucky, deliver one. Which is exactly what Love Honey is about. Your pleasure on your terms. No compromises, no mixed signals, no emotional admin. Just you actually having a good time. Love Honey. Because you deserve a good time without the admin. Find them at lovehoney.co.uk.
I get so many headaches every month.
It could be chronic migraine, 15 or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours or more.
Botox, onabotulinum toxin A, prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine. It's not for those who have 14 or fewer headache days a month. Prescription Botox is injected by your doctor. Effects of Botox may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away, as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness can be signs of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Side effects may include allergic reactions, neck and injection site pain, fatigue, and headache. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your doctor your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions, including ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects.
Why wait? Ask your doctor. Visit BotoxChronicMigraine.com or call 1-800-44-BOTOX to learn more.
Hello and welcome to The Shift, the podcast that aims to tell the no-holds-barred truth about being a woman post-40. Created and hosted by me, journalist and author Sam Baker. My guest today is the Australian writer and thinker, Charlotte Wood. Charlotte is the celebrated author of 7 novels and 3 books of non-fiction. I think I first encountered her with her novel The Natural Way of Things, which won the Stella Prize, which is the Australian equivalent of the Women's Prize, in 2016. Then, my favourite, The Weekend, which follows 3 women in their 70s as they clear the house of their dead friend over the course of a weekend, became an international bestseller, and she followed it up with Booker Prize shortlisted Stone Yard Devotional. In short, when Charlotte hit her mid-late 50s, her career became rocket-fueled. But we're here to talk about, amongst other things, food. I know, right? Because Charlotte's not just a critically acclaimed writer, she's also an excellent cook whose life was changed by Elizabeth David, apparently. More of that later. And in Love and Hunger, she writes about the gift of food, friendship and caring through cooking.
So the point of cooking for me is a kind of creative outlet, but it is also a way to get people sitting down together and relaxing, like not stressing about whether friggin' chocolate is tempered or like I don't cook fancy stuff.
Charlotte joined me from her home in Sydney to talk about our mutual adoration of the Australian writer Helen Garner, challenging cultural representations of older women, what to do with old friends, and getting diagnosed with cancer at the same time as both her sisters. We also discussed the lure of the stripped back life, why she lives in fear of becoming a boring, annoying old person, and our mutual loathing of home economics. Let's start with, I don't want to, if it's okay with you, just to talk about food.
Oh, God, yes. Yeah. I listen to lots of your podcasts, but I deliberately today listened to the Helen Garner one, which I loved.
Oh, I love her so much.
I love her so much. I met her a long time ago, and strangely, I met her just not long before we got married. And So I was sort of emailing her about this interview thing I'd done. And then I said, I know this sounds weird, but do you want to come to my wedding? I'd love to come to your wedding. And she was like in another city, and it was this big trip. But Bali, the place where we were getting married, which is on this little beach right up in the north of Sydney that you could only get to by boat, and it was a bit kind of annoying. And she said, my friend lives there. So she came. It was so fun. Everyone was too scared to speak to her because they were so awed.
So when Helen came to you, I'm overawed by that. So is Helen in your wedding pictures?
We didn't really do proper wedding pictures, but she must be in some of them. Yeah, I haven't looked at them in 20 something years. So I mean, it was amazing that she came. It was lovely.
Yeah, I was when she agreed to come on the podcast. I was a bit scared, if I'm honest, because I thought, oh, I bet she doesn't suffer fools, and I hope she doesn't think I'm a fool. But she was wonderful.
And she loves to chat about
Everything.
all sorts, you know. Yeah, exactly. National treasure.
Yes.
It's very exciting to see her finally getting the international recognition that she's always had here. You know, she's had that adoration here, but now she's kind of beyond, you know, everyone loves her now. It's so lovely to see.
Yeah, it was so nice to see her because she did, outside of Australia, really feel like a bit of a best kept secret.
Yeah.
It was so lovely to see last year everybody suddenly going nuts for her.
I know. Amazing. What a year for her. It was incredible.
Yeah, so it's never too late. Although she, not that you need to worry about that, but she did say, I mean, when she was on the podcast, she did say it was, 50 years since she wrote Monkey Grip. And she did feel a bit like, whoa, this is a bit strange. You know?
Yeah, that was 50 years. It's a bit alarming to me that we were all reading it when it first came out, which is kind of, actually, I didn't read it when I was 10, but I read it in my 20s. So it was obviously still in the student mind at that point.
When you were a student, were books like a rite of passage for you? Like that? Have you got those books in your head that, that you read then that still have some kind of significance?
I don't know that. I mean, books were absolutely central to everything as a child and then as a uni student. I'm trying to think about, I think school maybe were my kind of point book moments. Bizarrely, I remember reading Brideshead Revisited and just adoring it. I mean, from this little country town in Australia, that was huge for me. There were books at university, but they've sort of flowed through the river, you know. Lots of the books that I probably should have read in those university years, I didn't read till much later, like Virginia Woolf. I didn't read till I was in my 40s. I tried to read The Waves when I was about 14, and I just, could not make head nor tail of it. So it put me off her for a long time. But, so weirdly, I actually can't university years books, except that they were there all the time. We were all reading all the time, We didn't have anything else to do.
No, those are the days.
Mm.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I was listening to you talking about your work and I'm thinking about the way your work has, I don't want to say evolved, because that kind of sounds like something is better than something else. But, the way, the natural way of things, which was kind of arguably the book that broke you and was probably the first of your books that I read, the way that young women really love that book. And then you wrote The Weekend, which was like this incredibly radical act, which it shouldn't have been, when entering three women in their 70s. And that has a completely different audience. Was The Weekend intentional? I mean, obviously it was intentional, you wrote it, but was it an intention? Was it in the kind of centering those three older women? Was it a kind of a intentional act to put those women front and center?
Yes, it was. And it was also a reaction against the natural way of things, which was about young women and, I mean, a kind of pretty basic, switcheroo, I guess. I wanted to write about older women. I can't even remember what the first spark was, but I knew that all my friends have always been older than me. I've always gravitated to people sort of 10 or more years older than me as friends, and so I was writing that in must have been my mid-50s. And I have friends now who are in their 70s and 80s. I have one 90-year-old friend. And I just realized that the kind of cultural representations of women in their 70s, and probably more on television than in books, but were just so wrong. They were so outdated. They were, sort of rocking chairs and knitting and or in novels often some old woman lying in a hospital bed ready to die. And also they were often defined by family in terms of their patriarchal kind of relationships. And I was interested in writing about contemporary, older, middle-class women who did not have children, because I don't have children. Lots of my friends don't have children. And I just wanted to kind of modernize what I saw as a kind of weirdly just wrong representation of what contemporary women in their 70s are like. And, now half of my friends are turning 70. And, some of them are still working, some of them, or they're sort of freelancing or doing whatever, or they're retired, but they're not sitting around, doing their knitting. They out and about doing stuff. Some of them are kind of enraged that they are coming to the end of their working life. Some of them are thrilled that they're not working anymore. But I also thought it was an interesting, that generation of women now in their 70s, and even someone like Helen Garner in her early 80s, kind of the first generation of women who would face retirement in the way that men have always faced retirement. The sort of sudden loss of status and power. And these are women, the women in that book were all sort of professionals and pretty, high powered. So for them to lose their working identity was kind of losing everything. And some, they're trying to hang on to that in the case of Wendy and Adele. And none of them are really looking a bit further down the track, which, I think they probably should be, in terms of we're all going to die, but they are not interested in even thinking about that, because they are just living their lives and wanting to be taken as seriously as they have been before. So yeah, it was quite a deliberate sort of wanting to have a bit of a crack open of the way that old age, or not even, I mean, I wouldn't call 70 old age, but aging is talked about in literature and in popular culture. And often I noticed that if there is someone in their 70s or 80s, there's one, so it's the grandma or the aunt or whatever, or maybe the two parents, but not three women. I guess there was sort of Grace and Frankie. And I mean, there's probably heaps more now, but it's not that common still, I think.
No, it feels like it's still that, like you say, there's one, and what matters most about them is their relationship to someone else.
And also I wanted to write about friendship, and how old friends, like a long-term friendship, and how that can either calcify or change, and do we let our old friendships really change in kind of truthful ways, or do we need them to remain what they were? We all have groups of friends who are like our uni friends or our work friends, or where they're sort of the identity of the friendship is sort of often sort of defined by that early experience. So I was interested in thinking about whether, I think we all change a lot through our lives, and how do friendships weather that change, especially friendship between a group of people.
Especially, I mean, in the context of the weekend, but I do think about this quite a lot when the anchor person goes for some reason, whether they die or move or, for some reason the anchor is taken away.
Yeah. And in that book, so there were 4 friends, one called Sylvie, and she died. And then exactly that, she was the one who smoothed the waters when if somebody had a problem with somebody else in that group, she was the one who made sure that things were resolved. And so it's like there's 4 pegs, and then suddenly there's this big hole, and they don't know how to rearrange themselves, how to sort of recalibrate their little group around this great absence. And that hasn't happened to me yet, but I've certainly lost friends, but not in that sort of really close group. But I kind of dread the day that happens, because it will.
Which friend are you? Are you the
God.
anchor, or are you?
I don't know. I think do you think you can define yourself as the anchor?
No, I mean, I'm not an anchor.
And an initiator of things, but I wouldn't say I'm the anchor, I don't think. I may be a co-anchor, perhaps.
I get so many headaches every month.
It could be chronic migraine, 15 or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours or more.
Botox, onabotulinum toxin A, prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine. It's not for those who have 14 or fewer headache days a month. Prescription Botox is injected by your doctor. Effects of Botox may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away, as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness can be signs of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Side effects may include allergic reactions, neck and injection site pain, fatigue, and headache. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your doctor your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions, including ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects.
Why wait? Ask your doctor. Visit BotoxChronicMigraine.com or call 1-800-44-BOTOX to learn more.
You mentioned earlier that you have lots of much older friends. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I always wanted to be around people who were smarter than me, and often that went with people who were older than me, who just knew things, I know when I started my first little job at the local newspaper in the little country town where I grew up, all of my colleagues were 10 years older or more. And I just sort of loved being around proper adults, because there's a huge difference between 18 and 28. Whereas there's not a huge difference between, 58 and 68, I don't think. Yeah, and I just thought they were smart and clever, and I liked hanging out with them. I probably got friends like my age and older, but I really don't have a lot of younger friends, maybe a couple nephews and nieces who kind of maybe fill that space for me. So that's like a generation younger, and there's heaps of them.
I mean, you lost both your parents when you were really young, didn't you?
Yeah, I wasn't a child, but I was when my dad died, and 29 when my mother died.
That's young, though.
Well, when I think about it now, if I think about the young adults I know who at 29, they seem so young still. So, yeah, it was young. It was young to have no parents. Yeah.
Both your parents died of cancer, didn't they? And
yeah,
when you were writing Stone Yard Devotional, which you must have been roughly the same age as your parents, you were diagnosed with breast cancer, weren't you?
Yes, I was writing about my mother a lot, and about her death. She died at 58 and I was 56. But the kind of really crazy thing about that time was that my sister was diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer. She was 58. She, like her big sister does, said, right, all of you off to mammograms. And then and we just sort of did it because she, wanted us to. And then 2 more of us, were diagnosed at the same time. So There were 3 of us,
God.
and we were all in our 50s. But my sister was the age that Mum died of cancer, so not breast cancer. But it was very shocking. It was sort of, we sort of couldn't even compute it, it was so weird, and obviously scary and everything, but we knew immediately that we had, the best kind of breast cancer and how treatable it is and all that. And my 2 sisters had a pretty rough time of treatment, whereas I had a kind of smaller, earlier cancer. So it was like we were in this weird little trio together. Cancer was like the big bogeyman, the kind of the dread that you speak of, and then suddenly was like right there. So yeah, it was pretty wild time.
And massive kind of, I don't know, more mortality hit, I suppose. At a point when you were writing so much about that as well.
Yeah, it was, I've said before, it was like my life was catching up with what the book was sort of trying to do in exploring things about grief and memory and, resistance to suffering and all that sort of stuff. And then, I thought that I kind of knew all about those feelings and everything, and I was writing about them because they'd happened so long ago for us. And then it was like, whoop, you need to know more. Poof, here's this giant thing to deal with. And I mean, I still sort of understanding what it all meant, but for me, the greatest, the psychic shock of it was more than any of the physical stuff. It was a kind of greater crisis, was a crisis of the mind, and real anxiety about my sisters, because their cancers were worse than mine, and they had a really, so it felt like if what was happening to them, it kind of was happening to me in a lesser degree, but watching them and helping one of those sisters was in the country and one of them was here, and so she and I had the same surgeon, we had the same surgery on the same day. She had much scarier treatments, and I was helping her through that, and that was very hard to witness. So the people we had treating us were incredible at this amazing cancer hospital in Sydney. And one of the oncologists said, "Oh, you mustn't feel that you are sort of, you mustn't feel guilty about having the least of the problems." And I kind of burst into tears. It was like, that's exactly what I felt, in this weird, even though, it makes no sense, but it was strange.
And it does make sense. Are they both in remission now as well?
Yeah, they're both, I mean, as I said, we had this very, if you're going to get cancer, we had the best possible kind to get, which is, the most treatable kind of breast cancer. And so, yeah, sort of my treatment lasted, about 6 months, and theirs was longer and harder. But yeah, I mean, then there's medications that you have to take for 5 and 10 years, and so it's over, but it's not over, and there are side effects and blah blah. So it's funny, you sort of come out of it thinking, okay, that's over, but it doesn't really end. And I've said that to some people who've had cancer, and they're like, yeah, it doesn't end. It doesn't, because for me, psychically, it also doesn't end. But there are reminders in your body, that little, I had a weird thing called radiation recall, which is like 2 years after the radiation, all the effects of it just suddenly come back. So the kind of square, the pink square of not bad burning, but just suddenly appears on your skin, and there's pain and stuff. It's like, wow, the body is quite amazing. And once I knew that it wasn't, it was fine. It didn't matter. But I guess that's what I mean about things there's not an end point that goes, okay, that's done, well, not for me anyway. I think maybe some people do feel like that.
Yeah, I mean, the body is a crazy thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And, you realise sort of radiation is, in terms of all those treatments, not, they sort of say, oh, well, you might feel a bit tired, but some people get very badly burned, and my sister did and I did. And so then later, when that happens 2 years later, you think, oh my God, there's still stuff in your body from the treatment that, thank God for the treatment. I am all for the treatment. I'm not in any way resistant to the treatment, but it's, you realize how it's big, like it does weird things to your body, which is what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. So you were in your kind of like mid-50s when that happened, and you kind of arguably your career was kind of almost like rocket fueled by that point. I mean, we all have like moments. There's always things in everybody's life where, on the surface, one thing is happening, and in the private, something else is happening. But how did the kind of confluence of those two things, like I suppose you hadn't been shortlisted for the book yet, but you'd won the Stella Prize, and the weekend was like going nuts, sales wise, and then this is happening. How did those two things collide for you, if that makes any sense at all?
It does. Well, in a way, the weekend had been by far the most successful book in terms of sales, and around and internationally as well, which was that was the big kind of change for me, was that internationally my books were starting to really sell. And that was a very unusual, unfamiliar experience. And then I started writing. Well, I mean, Stone Yard Devotional came out of such a weird converging of circumstances, because first of all, there was COVID and lockdowns, but also around that in Australia, we had these horrific bushfires and then floods, and there was this mouse plague that I know haunts many people to this day from that book. But that was happening in the country, so it was this kind of weird biblical waves of kind of catastrophe on a big scale. And I think that book was kind of a response to those, at the same time as being completely isolated I was living with my husband in lockdown and, communicating like this and everything. But, that kind of freak out that we all had about what was going to happen. We didn't know what was going to happen. So that lockdown was kind of changed the way that I was working, I suppose. I think it made it a lot more serious. The book had started out being a bit more light-hearted, I suppose. And then when the COVID hit, it was like I kind of lost my, flippancy, perhaps, if I'd had any of that. And then, the lockdowns were over, and I was finishing the first draft, and then this cancer thing happened, which was then like another lockdown, because I didn't go anywhere. I didn't, I didn't answer the phone. I just went to treatment and home and to my sister's house. And so it was like a very strange set of circumstances that came together for that book to come out of. And honestly, I just thought, well, this is a weird book that, I've had this amazing luck, and this one and it was a much quieter book, a more somber sort of book. And I don't think it would have gone off in the way that it has since done. It was selling well in Australia, but not like the weekend. And then that Booker Prize shortlisting happened, and then everything went kind of nuts in a most wonderful way. But it happened kind of in slow motion in a way, if you get what I mean, because, it was published in 2023 here. The Booker thing happened at the end of 2024. Then it was published in America at the beginning of last year, and it did really well there. But it was sort of like little rolling events. So it was kind of great in that way, really.
I'm interested that Stone Yard Devotional was, like you said, it was a quiet book, and it was about the kind of stripping back, if you like, of life, of walking away. And as a book, in terms of the writing, it was much more stripped back. And you also have a Substack, which is about stripping back creatively. Is that an idea, that kind of sense of peeling away in your work, but also in your life? Is that a thing that's increasingly appealing to you?
Yeah, I think it is. And, I look at that newsletter and think it's probably a dumb name for it now. But at the time when I was really writing a lot of, I think I did it for about 8 months or something, a kind of one proper sort of essay a month about something to do with the creative process. And then and then all the Booker thing happened, and I was like, I just can't deal with this. As happens with many of my kind of side projects, I just went, oh, sorry, can't do this anymore. So it's there now as a kind of just a little notice board of stuff that I'm doing. But yes, subtraction was, I was interested in how can you make things better by taking things away rather than adding all the time. And the whole contemporary world is so noisy and it's always telling us that things will be better if you have more. And I've just, that year, the cancer year, the COVID year, sort of gave me a real distaste for that idea that we need more of everything to make us happy, because it's just not true. And it's also killing the planet and driving us crazy, like literally insane, I think. So I'm kind of interested in ways to simplify, and I'm not any kind of, Zen monk or anything, believe me. And I love a bit of retail therapy. And actually, when we had the cancer thing, we're having radiotherapy and chemotherapy and retail therapy. And it was kind of this weird, mindless kind of, I don't know, comfort seeking, I suppose, like online shopping, bing, another delivery of, something like a beautiful cushion, or, sort of things that you felt and were giving them to each other as well. Anyway, that was sideline into my retail life. So what I mean by that is that I am no saint at all about, stripped back life, but I do think that a stripped back life, it probably gives you a greater chance of happiness than an overstuffed life. And that goes for things like, filling your time and, I don't know. I just think simplifying everything as I get older is something that appeals a lot.
I mean, I think COVID's changed a lot, but I think it does also feel like a life stage thing that certainly I have felt like suddenly all those things that were so important in your 20s and 30s particularly just become, noise.
And just distracting, and I just kind of frazzle, it's sort of, it's like static or something in the air. I mean, I'm not very good at stripping back, I have to say, but I still aspire to it. I certainly do a lot less than when I was younger, and I do not sort of hustle anymore in the way that I did when I was younger. Partly because I actually don't need to now to earn money, which is such a enormous relief and luxury, pure luxury for a writer. But also I'm not sort of scrambling for, validation or something from doing enough to please everybody that I'm not. And I don't mean people pleasing in kind of being a doormat, because I don't think I ever was particularly that, but sort of, I don't know, doing my bit in the literary community, which I feel that I do, but I used to really feel that as a major responsibility, and now I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm old. That's I'll do my bit, but I'm not like that's for the next generation to take on.
I get so many headaches every month.
It could be chronic migraine, 15 or more headache days a month, each lasting 4 hours or more.
Botox, onabotulinum toxin A, prevents headaches in adults with chronic migraine. It's not for those who have 14 or fewer headache days a month. Prescription Botox is injected by your doctor. Effects of Botox may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away, as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness can be signs of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Side effects may include allergic reactions, neck and injection site pain, fatigue, and headache. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Don't receive Botox if there's a skin infection. Tell your doctor your medical history, muscle or nerve conditions, including ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects.
Why wait? Ask your doctor. Visit BotoxChronicMigraine.com or call 1-800-44-BOTOX to learn more.
Where do you get your validation now?
I do get it from my work. I get it from readers. I've had the most beautiful notes and letters from readers of Stone Yard Devotional, quite a lot from America. I think that book was published in America at a time, it was just after the second Trump election. And I think it somehow, for some people, has provided this kind of little pool of stillness and quiet in a world and in a society that we are only, not that far removed from here. But, I think being in America at the moment is terrifying. And I think for the readers who've contacted me from America who've said this book gave them a sense of calm that they had not been able to find anywhere else at that particular time. So that's an enormous, that's enormously validating to know that, that feels like a valuable thing to have offered somebody. But otherwise, I get it from my connections with people. I have a big family, and I mentioned my nephews and nieces before. We have 19 nephews and nieces between my husband and I. Two Catholic families, breeding everywhere. And we love them. And so we sort of hang out with them as much as we can, but also just, have friends and people around.
It struck me when I was reading Love and Hunger that all of your food memories are connected to people.
Yeah, well, that's the point of it, I think. Like partly Love and Hunger, book about learning to cook, really, and learning how to, and not learning to cook fancy stuff, like just literally like how to chop an onion, stuff like that.
That was a revelation for me. Leave the ends on. I mean,
yes,
oh my
leave the
God.
ends on. It changes everything. And also how to carve a chicken. That was the other revelation to me. I started writing it around the time that MasterChef started becoming a big thing here. I don't know if that's a big thing, or like Bake Off. And
it's huge.
I was kind of addicted to it for a little bit, but it was all about pressure and performance and anxiety and stress and speed and all of that. And for me, cooking is the complete opposite of that. It's a very creative process on which nothing depends. Like if you burn the food, who cares? It's not. So the point of cooking for me is a kind of creative outlet, but it is also a way to get people sitting down together and relaxing, like not stressing about whether freaking chocolate is tempered or like I don't cook fancy stuff. When I was younger, I did. And that was kind of fun and experimental and probably slightly trying to impress people. And now it's just like, make something easy, stick it in the middle of the table. The main thing is having the people around the food the food is an excuse to get the people there. So, last night I had some of those, I think we had, I don't know, there were 8 of us for dinner. My 2 nephews and a niece and girlfriends and my sister. And we just did roast chicken, which is kind of my go-to. And it was just lovely, very, simple, warming, normal, ordinary food, but in a relaxed way. That means a lot to me, to be able to do that, and to be able to share that confidence in cooking. I've met so many people who go, I love to cook, but I don't know how to do this or that. It's like, it doesn't matter. It just, it doesn't matter how you chop an onion, really. It really doesn't matter. It's easier when it doesn't make you cry and you don't cut your hand and all of that. But like, nothing depends, especially, I've got all these recipes in there that are basically, gathered from friends or whatever. And none of them would matter if you left out 3 ingredients or overcooked it, or, it just sort of, I wanted to convey a sense of just relaxing about food and enjoying it, and not being about impressing anybody, and not being about restaurant food or going to restaurants particularly. I love going to restaurants, sometimes. Again, I suppose it's, when you talk about simplicity and stripping back, that's the vibe that I wanted to put into this book, was about just things being easy and simple.
Did you grow up with a relaxed relationship around food and cooking?
My mum was a fantastic mother who did not enjoy cooking. She had 5 children. She had to cook every day of her life for God knows, 20 years or something. She cooked cakes and puddings and dinners and lunches. And I just think, I don't know how that woman did it when she did not enjoy it particularly. I mean, she didn't hate it, but, she cooked because she had to, basically. And we had we didn't have a lot of money, and there was certainly no takeaway restaurants, or, there was no...
It wasn't a thing then,
We
really,
didn't even
was
have
it?
fast food restaurants in the olden days when I was a child. It was... She had no choice. And I don't... I kind of wish that there were more. So I didn't grow up with a love for cooking. Yeah, and I think also the garden was a place for her to get away from all of us, and have some privacy and some... That was her creative outlet. And the cooking was, cooking food for 7 people every day, most of whom never really properly thanked her or, realized how much slavery was involved. So it really wasn't until I went to university and I hung out with people. One good friend who had trained as a cook, the chef, and didn't do that anymore, but she showed me how to, how to cut things properly, and how to present really simple food. Whenever I went to her house, it might be sort of lamb chops and a bit of salad and potato, but she'd always put it on a big platter, and it was always this sense of bounty and beauty and sort of leisureliness that was... I grew to really love that.
So is that where the seed grew for you? Because when I was reading the book and thinking about how you describe your mother's relationship with cooking just then, which I think is probably so many women's, and how growing up I saw it as like compulsory. My mum had to cook. She had to put food on the table every day, several times a day, whether or not she wanted to eat it. But also, and then being at school in the 70s and 80s, when boys did woodwork and metalwork and girls did the dreaded home economics, I just saw it. I don't know. It's extreme to say a form of entrapment, but it certainly wasn't something I ever wanted to get involved with.
Well, certainly the way it was presented to us, and those, I think there's a bit in the book about, those home economics classes. I mean, even calling it that for starters, they didn't call it how to have a dinner party or, how to nourish yourself. They called it home economics, which was just... And yeah, the boys did woodwork, which was much more interesting to me. And we had to, but we did things like folding fucking aprons and, really, it was the patriarchy's view of what women should do and be, and I absolutely hated those classes. I was really bad at it. And, yeah. So I didn't get any glimpse of the kind of pleasure and joy and freedom and creativity of it until I went to university and sort of had a lot of time on my hands because I skipped a lot of classes and was hanging around with people who did love to cook in that easy, pleasure-filled way. Simple, peasant food, I call it. But and it seemed to be a creative act, and that's what it never was when I was growing up or at school. And so that was my way into sort of falling in love with it, I suppose.
Well, I suppose it wasn't a creative act, was it? It was
Well,
necessity.
not for our mothers who didn't even want to do it but had no choice. I mean, there's nothing creative about that.
Yeah. You say in the book, my life has been changed by dinner more than once.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been changed by the people at the dinner, really. The vibe of the thing. And when I was at uni, I went to this one lunch where I first heard the words Elizabeth David, and it was at my I did all these sort of painting and drawing classes, and the lovely teacher invited me for lunch with him and his wife, and she was an amazing cook, and they were artists, and so I was just this little shy nobody who was so thrilled to be invited, but absolutely daunted. And anyway, and then I couldn't believe the deliciousness of this food. It was this pork cooked in milk, which I also found completely like, what the hell? And it was,
still
and
find
it
that
is,
boggling.
well, try it. It is unbelievably good and simple to make. But and I said something about, oh, this is amazing. And Lou, this woman, said, oh, I was just an old Elizabeth David thing. And I was like, I have no idea who that is. And then I came across, a week later in the charity shop, an Elizabeth David cookbook. And I just grabbed it and thought, this is a kind of portal into a life that I would love to have. This sort of, long lunches, paintings everywhere, and it wasn't about money because those people had no money, but they had taste and they had an idea of a way of living that was about beauty as much as anything. And so that was sort of very transformative for me, to sort of be introduced to that way of that was a possible way to live, I suppose.
It feels like, in a way, that cooking is almost as important as writing to you.
Yeah, well, it's one thing about it that I love is that it is a creative outlet, but I think, as I said before, nothing depends on it. Like, no one's scrutinizing it. I'm not putting it out into the world to be judged and evaluated and marketed, and other people's incomes don't depend on whether my spaghetti bolognese is dry. It doesn't matter. So it's sort of ephemeral, it's there and it's gone, and it's but I like the occasion of having people around for dinner or lunch. I love the making the room nice and setting the table and creating that little sense of occasion, even when it's very, very simple. I find that extremely gratifying and grounding. And if there's a period that goes by where I'm not cooking, I do feel a bit unanchored, I suppose. And a friend of mine said, I always know that you're doing fine if you mention that you've cooked something. Because, sometimes you go through periods of being really busy and going out or getting takeaway or going to other people's houses or whatever. But that sense of like feet on the right ground is when I'm cooking. Not all the time, but, regularly.
It's interesting. I've definitely had other guests who've talked about gardening like that. Is cooking your main coping mechanism?
I don't know. There's something. I have a really good friend who's a psychologist, and she works with writers a lot. And I was talking to her about, when ideas come to you in the shower or when you're walking and for me, sometimes when I'm cooking, and she said, I think it's called the default mode network, and it's your brain kind of doing what it should in making connections when you're not trying to make them, and so cooking does that for me. It's something to do with your hands that is, easy, like you're familiar with it. You're not grappling with terribly new information. So it's a kind of rhythmic movement that, lets my mind sort of, drift out into other places, into kind of dreaminess.
When you were talking about, your brain doing what it's meant to do, it just made me think back to what we were talking about, the noise of modern life and that kind of constant static. And almost always now when I'm doing something, might be walking, or I don't do a lot of cooking, but if I do, I'm always doing something else as well. Like I'm always listening to something, listening to an audiobook or whatever. Do you do that, or are you more disciplined about that?
When I'm cooking, I sometimes listen to podcasts. That's the kind of time that I do listen to them. Or I listen to music. And I love that, actually. It's almost the only time that I regularly listen to music is when I'm cooking. But I'm trying more, because of this, we're finally understanding what this kind of overload and enfrazzlement is doing to us. I'm trying to not do too many things at once now. Yeah, I'm trying to learn to do one thing at a time, but I'm not very good at that because I am sort of quite a restless sort of person too. But see, cooking does that because it is quite, especially if you're cooking something you haven't made before, and you've got to look at the recipe, and actually I can't be too distracted or I just lose track of everything. So not in a pressured way, but in a just a lightly attentive way. Because if I am listening to something that is really interesting, eventually I just stop doing what I'm doing and listen. I would like to be more attentive to one thing at a time, because I do think my brain is being destroyed by the internet and the kind of multitasking that's just ruinous in every way, really. And it's like writing. I cannot write if I can't listen to music even. I know lots of writers can, but I can't. So it's the one thing where I just have to be completely absorbed in that one task. And that's where the pleasure comes from eventually. So I'm really frightened about my brain and its capacity to think.
Is that your main fear about aging?
Yeah, no, I fear, what do I fear about aging? I mean, yes, of course, I fear dementia and, Alzheimer's and those sorts of things. But I have a weird faith that my husband will just sort of, I don't know, knock me on the head or something, as agreed, if that happens. But,
Same, yeah.
but, but strangely, what I fear about aging, this is going to sound kind of ridiculous, but I fear becoming a boring, annoying old person. That sort of
Doesn't sound ridiculous.
someone who doesn't listen anymore and who just sort of berates young people, and that sort of, I don't know, you see it sometimes where people start to lose their capacity to actually connect with people, especially people of a different generation. And I just really do not want to be like that. So that's kind of, and of course I fear, disability and pain and all of that, but I don't fear aging the way that lots of people fear it. And when I was writing The Weekend, I had this amazing fellowship at this incredible science research facility, and this young woman who worked there, who was very beautiful, came and sort of chatted to me one day, and she said, "You're writing about aging, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And she sort of looked really carefully at my face. I was about 50 then. She looked at my face and she said, "I'm petrified of aging."
Oh my God.
And I was like, Oh, sweetie. Well, you probably won't look like this, so don't worry. But, she was like this.
Great.
She said she was, and, it wasn't about what I look like, but her fear of just the word. And I just find that kind of bizarre, really. It's like, well, I suppose, having lost my parents young, I have always thought that I would be dead by now. So I'm now 2 years older than my mother ever got to be and 7 years older than my father got to be. And so I'm like, mate, this is great. But I don't want to, I fear a loss of connection to the world more than I fear the physical stuff.
Right, I better ask you the questions that I always ask at the end. What is your emotional age?
I think it's now. So I'm 60. I think it's 60. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll just think it is, I do think I'm kind of saner now than I have ever been, which is a great relief.
Yeah. Give us a book recommendation.
Well, speaking of brains rotting or not, I recently, for the first time, read Middlemarch, and I was blown away by its brilliance. And I had, I am known among my friends for being quite pathetic about reading fat books. I love a short book.
Too.
I love a short book. And so the idea of Middlemarch, which is enormous, was quite daunting. But there's this fantastic podcast in Australia. It's called The Secret Life of Books. And they had a kind of book club about Middlemarch. And I just went into it. And then I absolutely fell in love with it. And what I discovered while being immersed in this long, incredible book was that my brain started to come back. It was like, oh my God, this is what it used to be like when I was at university and I read. It's sort of because it took effort. It took sort of attention. I couldn't, have my phone near me or anything. It was like, okay, I'm reading this book. And it was absolutely rewarded. It was a thrilling book to read. But I was sort of elated by knowing that way of paying attention was still available to me, because I do feel that I have lost it in the last, since the internet was invented. But the other book I want to just quickly mention is to be published in August in the UK. It's by a New Zealand writer called Damien Wilkins, and it's called Delirious, and is my absolute favourite of certainly the last year, because it's been published in New Zealand before now, but not elsewhere. And it is beautiful and magnificent.
What advice would you give younger women?
I would say to younger women, and when I say this, I'm saying it to my younger self, stop thinking about yourself. Turn that attention outward. I was very neurotic as a young woman and just obsessed with what people thought of me, what, appearing to do the wrong thing or whatever. And it's such a waste of time and energy. And, this psychologist friend of mine I was talking about has all these little sayings that I find very useful. And she says, look, this is a bit cringy, but, this thing that's helped me enormously in the past while is, she says, where attention goes, energy flows. And that...
Oh, that's good.
And it's so true that things like, I don't like my hair or whatever. When I was younger, that could occupy me for way too much time. And I just wish that I'd been able to just put my attention elsewhere. And that's where the energy would go to, rather than this kind of self-excoriation that was, and also just very self-indulgent. So that's what I would say. Turn your attention outward from yourself.
Who is an older woman who's inspired you?
There are several, but my role model as an artist and as a woman in Australia is Helen Garner.
I thought we might come full circle.
I love the way she remains so open to the world. She's in her 80s, her work has never calcified into sort of the same old stuff. She's alert, and I mean, you know from talking to her that she's just sort of hungry for the world and to be absorbing the world. Even when she's sort of critical of it, she's a part of it. And I love that. And there's another artist here in Australia called Anne Thompson, who is an abstract painter. And she is 91, I think, maybe even older. And she is just a demon. She's amazing. So these women artists are my role models.
What's your superpower?
I think my superpower is what I was alluding to before about making a welcoming table, making a place that is welcoming, a welcoming occasion, maybe. A dinner table as an occasion that is kind of beautiful, I hope.
And last one, how many fucks do you give?
Yeah, I'm just more judicious about where I give my fucks these days, which is very liberating. So there are quite a lot that I no longer give about certain stupid things, but the ones that I do give, they're focused.
Yeah, I like that, focused fuck giving. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy The Shift and would like to show your appreciation, why not buy me a coffee? Go to www.buymeacoffee.com/The Shift with Sam Baker. You can hear a new episode of The Shift every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, please do rate, review, follow, tell your friends, because it really does help other people find us. And if you'd like to know more about my own experience of shifting, my book, The Shift, How I Lost and Found Myself After 40, and you can too, is out now in paperback.
This episode is brought to you by Love Honey. Relationships can be messy, chaotic, and here's something nobody really says out loud, but everyone knows. Sometimes other people are just a lot. The situationship that's been situationshipping for 6 months with no resolution. The date who was perfect on paper but insufferable in person. The person who texts back eventually, having clearly not read what you actually said. And at some point, you just decide, not tonight. Tonight, I am taking myself off the market entirely. Plans cancelled, door locked, phone face down. This evening is for me and nobody else is invited. This is actually a radical act of self-prioritization. Choosing your own good time over waiting for someone else to maybe, possibly, if you're lucky, deliver one. Which is exactly what Love Honey is about. Your pleasure on your terms. No compromises, no mixed signals, no emotional admin. Just you actually having a good time. Love Honey, because you deserve a good time without the admin. Find them at lovehoney.co.uk.
Close your eyes, exhale, feel your body relax, and let go of whatever you're carrying today.
Well, I'm letting go of the worry that I wouldn't get my new contacts in time for this class. I got them delivered free from 1-800-CONTACTS. Oh my gosh, they're so fast.
And breathe.
Oh, sorry. I almost couldn't breathe when I saw the discount they gave me on my first order. Oh, sorry. Namaste.
Visit 1-800-CONTACTS.com today to save on your first order.
1-800-CONTACTS.